Wealth, fame, power. This was the opening line to a story that started in the early to mid 1990s and was known as a comic called One Piece. One Piece show started about 2 years after, and this is a story that many know as a show about pirates. While it seems fun and silly at first, there are actually a lot of really deep topics that made it the perfect topic for my speech today. Starting off, there are a lot of dark and complicated themes and heavy ideas of loyalty, and even a lot of different views on what freedom is. First off, of heavy topics. Within the first 40 episodes of the show, while you wouldn't think it, there's immediately an established sense of racism and cruelty in some characters, and you learn a lot about what happens in this world. And even like even in one character's instance we meet named Law. Trafalgar D. Waterlaw, whom we meet about halfway through the story, came from a country where the nobles forced people to mine white lead for multiple generations. Well, this led to mass lead poisoning, and so around when Law was 8 years old, everyone he knew started getting lead poisoning all at once, and the doctors were trying to figure it out, but before they ever could, the government wanted to cover up the nobles' involvement with this, so they decided to issue an order to exterminate everyone. Everyone Law knew was killed, and he was only barely able to flee this country with no family, no friends, and nowhere to go. So that's where you really would think that the story ended, but that's not even half of it. He fled to a very evil man who promised that he would let him basically take revenge on the world. But the man's younger brother saw that this kid was hurting and sick and was going to die in a few years. And so the little brother took the kid and did everything he could to try to save him. In the end, after being run out of town by every doctor over the span of 2.5 years, this little brother actually sacrificed everything he could to get the one thing that could save him. And in the end, this little brother was killed by the older brother. This already shows a lot of heavy topics, from abuse of power to manslaughter and mass genocide and desperation. Basically all just heavy things you wouldn't think when starting the first episode. The second topic that's heavily covered in this show is that of loyalty. Luffy, the main character, is one of the most loyal people in this world. And it's shown that he'd do anything to save a friend. So when he, for example, climbs a mountain in a snowstorm, it's a very steep mountain, he climbs barehanded in a snowstorm, carrying two of his crewmates, one sick and wearing his coat, and the other injured with his mouth, carrying him with his mouth, dragging them up this mountain to see the only doctor on the island. To when a little girl who was starving in a poor country gave him a bowl of rice, he reciprocated this by freeing her country and overtopping the overlord that was holding them all to this low standard of living. This shows that a friend of Luffy is probably going to be met with the most loyalty one would ever see, and in return, everyone that sides with him ends up giving him this same loyalty. And I think there's a lot our world could take note of from this. Third, there are heavy influences of freedom. And what freedom means is kind of given a new complicated view in this story. The best way to describe it is using 3 characters. The first is Luffy's older brother, Ace. Ace viewed freedom as being able to do whatever he wanted with no one telling him otherwise. And he set out to be a pirate because everyone he had ever met would hate a man that he never got to meet, his father. And he decided he wanted to make his own story, so he went out and he decided that he would become such a famous pirate that, love him or hate him, no one could ever say they didn't know him. And this was because all of the scorn his father got. Sabo, Luffy's other older brother, who was presumed dead as a child, actually, instead of dying, so he had been born a noble, but had lived with Ace and Luffy for so long that he knew the bad side of nobility. And so when he was attacked by a world noble, he lost his memory, but he still ended up joining the revolutionary army opposing the world government to change the common people's standing. Luffy wants to be the king of the pirates, which, while that seems like something where wealth, fame, or power is the goal, in reality, he wants to be the most free man in the world. What freer than the king of the free? All in all, this is a very large story, and every detail could probably be its own speech in itself. But but what I have is the bare bones of what I really love about it. And I hope that this is a good way to get into the show.